Hi everybody, and welcome back to this episode of The Builder Explains, where I try to do what appears to be a very poor job of explaining how things work, because the capacitors didn't exactly work out as I really intended. Either way, I'm Alex, and you're watching The Renaissance Builder. So today I would like to talk about electricity in a very basic form. Now mind you, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a physicist, so we're going to come at this from a layman's perspective, and hopefully I can explain this in a way that everybody can understand what we're talking about. The reason this came up, and the reason I thought we would talk about this, is I have here in front of me a 12,000 volt transformer it's actually for neon signs. Neon signs work in a very unique way. We'll cover that in a different episode. But suffice it to say, this is what's considered a high voltage transformer. So what is a high voltage transformer? So I thought to explain this, I would try going over quickly and not necessarily thoroughly, but quickly and adequately enough that you can understand at least what we're doing. So, electricity. Electricity really only has one form, because electricity really breaks down to its very core of an electron moving from one atom to another atom. And that's only one directional movement when that electron moves from one to another. So in reality, you only have one form of electricity, and that's DC, direct current. Now you're probably going to say to me, dude, you ain't right. That's alternating current in your house. Well, and you would be correct. Alternating current is actually direct current that switches. It simply goes from positive to negative and back to positive many times a second. In the United States, it does it 60 times a second. Well, it makes the journey from positive to negative and back again 60 times a second. So it's actually switching, it's crossing zero 120 times a second. In Europe and pretty much everywhere else in the world, they work on 50 hertz, so it switches 50 times a second. So we can draw that out in what we call a sine wave. And not to get overcomplicated, but a sine wave is just basically a picture of voltage over time. So what we do, in order to show you alternating current, well, let me back up. I'll show you direct current. That's direct current. A solid line. The dotted line indicating 0 volts. So our voltage on this side and our time on this side, direct current, like measuring out of a battery, say it's 12 volts or 5 volts or 1.5 volts or 1.2 volts or whatever other voltage you got out there, is a pretty steady voltage over time. That's DC, direct current. Here's what AC does. So we need to have our 0 volt reference line. So we draw that with our dotted line. Again, our amplitude scale is going this way, and our time scale is going this way. So we increase voltage and decrease voltage this way, and our time is represented kind of like a scroll, kind of like old video games. Here's what happens. We start at 0, and we steadily increase voltage to a certain point. And then we come back to 0, where we decrease voltage to a certain point, and then back again. That's alternating current. That's why it's called alternating current, because it alternates. Pretty simple. It's really not that complicated to understand, and actually it's pretty simple to explain, so I can get it correct this time. So you have various versions of alternating current. Standard, at least in America, standard residential in your house, voltage and current is usually, and mind you, RMS, it's averaged at about 120 volts AC. So we're just going to say, I'm not going to draw the line of measurement because it's not that. So 120 volts AC, and your normal outlet is anywhere between 15 and 20 amps until the breaker trips. So, understanding this is the same scale, DC, AC, same 0-point reference, same amplitude and time scale. The only difference is AC goes positive and then negative and then back again. Now the reason this happens is mostly because it's mostly a mechanical answer. I say mostly a mechanical answer why this happens. It's how they generate the electricity at your plant. However, a guy named Nikola Tesla came up with this idea. I think it's over 100 years ago. And at that time, you had Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison were the two big names in electricity. And that's a whole nother story that we can cover in a different episode. It's very interesting. I would definitely say look it up if you are interested in this stuff at all. But the biggest reason that alternating current won the battle of electricity is one specific thing. And I would like to believe, like, it wouldn't surprise me at all if you could talk to Nikola Tesla that the entire reason he invented alternating current, two reasons. Alternating current also made the induction motor possible, but probably the biggest reason that alternating current was so successful is because it switches. Now, what does this have to do with our transformer? Well, we'll go over that. I'm going to throw one thing at you. That one thing is called the generation principle, or inverse the motor principle. That means that in order to generate electricity, you need three things. You need a magnetic field, a conductor, and relative motion. Now, to simplify that in layman's terms, I need a magnetic field. So let's say I just take a bar magnet, right? I'm just going to draw my bar magnet north, south, and you know the lines of flux deal, right? Pretty simple. Everybody knows this. Everybody understands this. The lines of flux, it's the magnetic energy that a magnet produces. So, we need a magnetic field. We need a conductor or a coil of wire, right? So I'm going to draw that like this. Now the relative motion bit. If I spin this here magnet, right? So I'm just going to draw arrows. Then the magnetic field moves across the conductor, pushing the electrons. Magnetic field has influence over electrons. So as the magnetic field moves, because we're spinning the magnet, as it moves over the conductor or coil of wire, it pushes the electrons, generating electricity. That's the generation principle. The motor principle works in the inverse. We take a conductor, we feed it electricity, which then produces a magnetic field and pushes our already existing magnetic field. That's very basic DC motor idea. Transformers. You say you still don't understand what this has to do with transformers. Well, let's go over that right now. The thing that alternating current has done for us is allowed us to use a very, very simple principle called transformers that don't need any mechanical movement in order to do the same thing. So here's what we do. We take a coil of wire, right? Our conductor. We're going to put another coil of wire next to it. Let's just assume for now they're the same amount of turns, so they're each 10 turns. That means 10 loops of wire, right? Now, in order for us to generate or do anything with electricity, we still need the magnetic field and the relative motion. So if I energize this, let's just say I put 12 volts to it, and for shits and giggles, let's say it's 1 ohm, so I end up with 12 amps, okay? I get a magnetic field, right? Now, if I put 12 volts DC, it doesn't do anything for me because all I have at this point is one coil producing a magnetic field, the other coil sitting there in no motion. Well, shucks, that's a head scratcher. Now, how do I change this? How do I make this work? I need motion, right? What am I going to do? Spin the coil? This is where Nikola Tesla's genius came into play. If we alternate this current, then every time, and now remember it happens 120 times a second, every time we build and collapse that field, and I'll just draw a little version of it down here, right? Every time we build and collapse and build and collapse this field, this magnetic field grows and shrinks, grows and shrinks, grows and shrinks. It happens 120 times per second in the United States. There's your relative motion. Now, the second coil is seeing a magnetic field move across it. And because that magnetic field is now moving across it, because it's building and shrinking and building and shrinking, now we generate electricity. And it generates the same electricity. Remember, 10 to 10. Equal coils will generate equal voltage and amperage. So we end up generating 12 volts AC at 12 amps. We just made a transformer. Now you say, what good does that do me? Like, why? Why would I want to do that? Well, the reason they do that, the reason they decided to do that, and the reason it worked is because there's a little thing that we can do here. If I change the amount of windings, let's say I have one winding, right? We'll change this picture a little bit because I only have one winding. I just decreased the amount of voltage. Now I only have, it's less than 1, so it's going to be like 0.9 volts or so. I could do the math, but whatever. In fact, I'm going to change this to 10 volts because that'll make it easy. At 10 volts here, I'm only going to have 1 volt there, but I have the potential for 100 amps. I changed the electricity doing so. Now, you say, 1 volt, what good does that do us? Well, 1 volt at 100 amps, you can almost weld with that. However, if I change this to 100 turns, now I get 100 volts with a 1 amp. I'm sorry, I didn't change the amps here. 10 amp. With a 1 amp potential. Here's where that makes a difference. The reason that all this wraps up and the whole reason that alternating current won that whole battle is we can change our voltage from something that's easy to produce to a very high voltage that's easy to transmit, making it so that we can send electricity long distances. And then every time it decreases, like we need to boost it a little bit, we put another transformer station where we have more transformers like this to boost the voltage to keep it going. So that's why AC. And how does that affect us here? That's exactly what this is doing. We're putting in 120 volts and we're transforming it and putting out 12,000 volts because of that very principle. Now, as I said, we increase the voltage, we decrease the amperage. So we only have, shoot, what is this thing rated for? I think it's like 0.035 amps. If that, it might be 0.00, it's a minuscule amount of amperage. but it's 12,000 volts. In the case of a neon sign, you don't need much amps, so the 12,000 volts is what gets the job done. So, that is a basic crash course in electricity and what it has to do with our experiment. So, if you enjoyed this, please hit the thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed, because this thing, and actually the other one we have too, is going to get used in the next video where we are going to experiment with some Jacob's ladders. And we'll go over then what a Jacob's ladder is, what it's actually doing, and then we'll have some fun with it. See if we can't make some interesting results out of these things. So, until then, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Have a good night. Take care.
Bye-bye.